Hello, I'm Barry Shaw. This is The View from Israel. As many as you know, I've been researching, writing about, speaking about the decay of Western civilization and its surrender to a different culture. And we're seeing the impact, the negative impact of this, wherever you look, in Europe, to Australia, to some extent in the United States. But it seems with the recent election, maybe the chances of the United States stabilizing itself and looking after its vested interests are going to change. But there doesn't seem to be this sort of hope in Europe or in places like Australia. As well as me writing, I want to remind you that somebody who has been increasingly popular over the last few years is Douglas Murray, wrote about this in 2017 in his book, The Strange Death of Europe, in which he claims that that death was caused by the three I's. In his words, immigration, identity, and Islam. I don't think there's anybody really who cares about Western civilization that doesn't agree that there is a decay in the West, and it's accompanied by an abandonment of its finer values, which once included the fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism. Following Europe, and of course the extermination of 6 million Jews. And yet, within the same lifespan, we're seeing in Europe, parts of Australia as well, modern day Nazis, by depicting Israel, of all people, the collective Jew, as the ones that are committing genocide, even as the Palestinians are committing genocide attacks against us. As I wrote in my own book, Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Anti-Semitism, and I wrote, when an anti-Israel obsession is linked to Jew hatred, this inevitably must explode into violence and acts of terrorism. Can anybody doubt that was true? In my book, Israel Reclaiming the Narrative, I wrote this: in the information war that is an integral part of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, the attacks being directed by the Palestinian side against Israel are ably supported by associated forces, useful idiots, diplomats, and misguided and malevolent media. I didn't write this book after the 7th of October. I wrote this book way back in 2011. Can anybody doubt, in light of what's happened to Israel and what is happening in your countries, that this isn't a fundamental truth? So what's going on here? What's caused Western civilization to become so infected that it's leading to its death? And as I searched for answers, I came across another writer, Gad Saad, whose excellent book, The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. And then I came across a report written by my guest today, Professor Eliyahu Richter from the Hebrew University School of Public Health and the founder of the Jerusalem Center for the Prevention of Genocide. It caught my attention. Professor Richter posits that what's going on throughout the prism of epidemiology and the environmental medicine, of how cancerous preventative policies can and does endanger the health, indeed the life, of once healthy societies. Professor Richter, welcome to The View from Israel.
Thank you very much, Barry. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with your host from Sweden. How did I get into this? Yeah. I am a public health doctor, a lot of work in environmental medicine, dealing with toxic exposures, and a lot of joint work with Palestinians and Jordanians over the years. And then, like many other people, I began to feel something is wrong as we saw much of the terror emerging in the last 25 years. And I began focusing. I said, well, here's what's going on here. It's the incitement. It's not borders. It's not refugees. It's not territory. It's not water. It's the incitement. And then I dug a little further and I said, well, it's not just the incitement. What leads to the incitement? It's the indoctrination, which is upstream. And how do I define these two terms? Well, both indoctrination and incitement require dehumanization, demonization, delegitimization, double standards, genocide denial, and the glorification of terror and violence. These are the ideas that permeated the social system of the Palestinian world, and not just the Palestinian world. These motifs are now embedded very deeply throughout much of the Muslim world. So, that being the case, what do we do about all this? And I wrestled long and hard with ideas for intervention. And then came October 7th. And as I saw the war unfold, I began to say, well, are there other models for effective intervention to stop the spread of such hatred, violence, terror, and death? And the model that came to mind was the model of denazification of Germany and de-Japanization, if you will, of Japan after World War II, where the Allies took over and conquered countries in which the ideas and motifs of hate and violence, the demonization, the delegitimization, the violence, and the glorification of terror were deeply embedded in the society. And the ideas were embedded from cradle to grave, as we now know from what we've seen now in Hamas. Every playpen, every bedroom, every playground, every summer camp is now totally embedded with the motifs of hate and demonization. And the demonization is not just from Hamas. Much of it really derives from the Palestinian Authority. Hamas is just carrying out the business, the playbook. So it's the message is very, very pessimistic, but potentially there is hope for possible change. And that hope for change requires us to build on the models of denazification. Now, denazification in Germany and the parallel democratization of Japan were not easy stories. In fact, when General Dwight Eisenhower confronted the situation in Germany after World War II, he feared that denazification would require 50 years. In fact, went much faster. And what happened were there were fundamental changes in the structure of German society, the changes in its legal structure, the changes in its social structure, the changes in its educational system, and the changes in its constitution as well. And, of course, there was the Marshall Plan as well. In Japan, there was, in parallel, the massive program of democratization presided over by General Douglas MacArthur. Now, what happened in Germany and Japan were not touchy-feely exercises. They were top-down, directed. There was a lot of command and control, and very rigid punishment for promotion of indoctrination and incitement. And the textbooks were totally revised. The school systems were totally changed. The teachers were changed, and so on.
So it's just like Hamas in Gaza. The people are with Hamas, They are all Nazified by Hamas. They're all fully supportive, and yet anybody who disagrees gets the wrath of Hamas. As we know, people in Gaza have been killed by Hamas because they oppose them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, my concern, everyone is now talking about the reconstruction of Gaza in terms of all the hardware going into Gaza, water, food, sanitation, medications, and all the rest. Okay, but here's my concern. If all these changes are introduced into Gaza to repair all the physical damage in Gaza, and you start producing a new generation of healthy Gazans,
Healthy Nazis.
Who still are indoctrinated, yes. What we'll simply have is healthier, stronger Nazis. Exactly. That's my concern. So if you don't deal with the software of indoctrination while you're changing the hardware, changing the physical damage, it's going to make things, you're going to simply make things worse.
Actually, I'm delighted you said that, because it fits in absolutely ideally with the solution that I've been promoting for over a year now, of what I call, the new Gaza being what I call an Abraham Lahore protectorate. And I've said exactly what you said. That part of that has to be not just the reconstruction of the buildings and the schools, etc., but also the deconstruction of the radicalization and the indoctrination. One without the two is an impossible thing. You're simply feeding the next explosion of a Nazi sort of.
You have healthier, stronger terrorists.
Right.
That's what you'll have.
Right.
Fed on the diet of demonization, dehumanization, and glorification of violence.
Right.
So there is a case for emergency intervention starting right away to change to totally overhaul the mindset of the population of concern. Now, this is not going to be easy. Now, I myself have proposed some role models. There have been some examples of de-radicalization in the Muslim world. I'm not expert on them. Saudi Arabia supposedly had some fairly good results.
Right.
So has Morocco.
Right.
I think here we're going to have a much tougher nut to crack, but we have to start doing this. And it starts with recognizing that we're dealing with the mindsets and the values. Now, keep in mind what's happened. Until now, the perpetration of the motifs of hate and violence and demonization and dehumanization is intergenerational. It goes from generation to generation,
right.
And it's cradle to grave.
Right.
As we've seen in Gaza, the nurseries, the playpens, you see motifs of hate, toys, children's games. It's all there, cradle to grave. So unless we realize this is the problem, and unless we get serious about the depth and intensity and degree to which the threat is embedded in the fabric of society from A to Z, we're not going to accomplish anything, and we're going to make things worse.
What I agree with you again completely is I came to the conclusion over a year ago now that what you're saying is precisely right. And the way to do this denazification to our Arab-speaking community, I don't believe can be done neither by Israel or the United States, and certainly not the Europeans, certainly not the United Nations, forget about them. But therefore it could be done by the countries that are already tied together with Israel willingly, like UAE and Bahrain, the moderate Islamic.
Amen. Amen.
With the addition perhaps of Saudi Arabia, because they speak the language and they have a vested interest in not to be imperiled themselves by a rise of radical Islam, but in fact to play an active part in the denazification, the re-radicalization, by teaching their more moderate, modern form of Islam, if you want to put it that way.
I don't like to use the word modern or traditional. The term I would use.
Modern old, if you like. Modern Judaism.
I would like to say that we have to recognize that if the successful role models are based on the fact that Muslim societies basically traditional, religious, and conservative. And you have to build on the values in traditional, religious, and conservative
Right.
Societies, which emphasize sanctity of life, respect for life, kindness, respect for the other, and these values are there. Now, I gave a specific example from some of my own work in Israel, where, together with a colleague, Professor Mohammed Dajani, who founded an organization called Wasatiyah, which in Arabic means moderation. And what Dajani did was to compile all the quotes from the Quran and the other sacred texts, which promote moderation, kindness, respect for others, sanctity of life, treatment of kind, treatment of prisoners, and all the rest. You have to go to the court, you have to use the traditional motifs and messages in the tradition to push the message.
Can I change the subject now? Because we're talking about how directly to drain the swamp so far as the radicalization and the indoctrination of the Palestinians, whether it's under the Palestinian Authority or in Gaza, all subsidized and helped by European countries and under the auspices of the United Nations, UNRWA, etc.
Not just Palestine. I think we have to see an opportunity here. We have a problem. We're problem in Palestinian society, let's say, but perhaps we should make it into a larger problem, the entire Muslim world in our region. That's what Dwight Eisenhower once said, that if you want to solve a small problem, make it into a bigger problem. And maybe we should be doing so. And clearly, we in Israel cannot do this ourselves. We can help feed the ideas into the cement mixer, but we need a very, very large, organized, institutional, international network to do this.
Hence the introduction, as I make out, an Abraham Accords protectorate.
A great idea.
Where the UAE and Bahrain are already in, so is Morocco, but also the introduction of Saudi Arabia. They have a vested interest. I would like to take the conversation outside of the Middle East, if I may.
Sure.
Because you're dealing with the poison swamp, and I would put it to you that it's as hard a job rescuing Western civilization from their own decay. And they are, if you've been following what's been going on in Europe and other countries as well, they are so deeply invested in aiding and abetting the tsunami of migrants they have allowed in their country by throwing away their own national values and principles for the aid of what they call multiculturalism, by inviting millions of people from the Middle East who haven't got the foggiest idea and really want to know what multiculturalism is. And they have allowed them in, and they come, as Professor or Dr. Mordechai Gar tells me, they don't leave their baggage behind. They bring their cultural baggage with them, and they unpack them once they feel settled in whatever country they're living in. And they're beginning to make their feelings felt in these countries, whether it's in Britain or Sweden, where my producer is, whether it's in Belgium, whatever, Germany, even stretching to Australia. Okay, so we've been speaking about the actual inherent danger of a radicalized Palestinian community, whether it's in the Judea and Samaria under Ramallah or in Gaza, and maybe other supported by the millions of people around the world who support their cause and very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, dare say. But I make the case here of the Jews are always the canary in the mine shaft. We smell the danger, this danger of anti-Semitism before the rest of the world is aware of it. And we try chirping out because first it starts with the Jews and then it spreads to other people. As we say, first they come for the Saturday people and then they come for the Sunday people. But what we're finding today, and this is part of the fight we're on, and we seem to be losing this fight, that the Western so-called civilization have become, in the last year or so, instead of standing with us, have become so anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, promoting the Palestinian Hamas by, for instance, disguising them as the poor Palestinians, facing a genocide of us after trying to genocidally destroy us. So how do we drain that swamp, that poisonous swamp, using your epidemiological terms?
Let's be careful about overuse of these metaphors. As a doctor and as an epidemiologist and a toxicologist, it's very dangerous to misuse such metaphors. In fact, sometimes they can be used in the other direction. There was a fellow who wrote a collection of such metaphors, whose name was Adolf Hitler, which was just a collection of metaphors, Mein Kampf. So let's.
Nobody's talking about wiping out a community here. I'm talking about saving community.
Well, I think we don't, having proposed the epidemiologic model, I think we have to now go back to issues which go beyond epidemiology. And these are our basic values, our core values. And our core values are those of Western civilization, the sanctity of life, respect for the other, and all the other foundational ideas of Western civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization, and we have to. You don't need epidemiologic models to promote these values. You need the basic values themselves.
But I make the case that we do promote these values. In fact, we carry out these values. But we have a situation, I'm fighting on a daily basis of the Western media taking the language and the tradition of Hamas in Gaza, for instance, by lying about the figures and the casualty figures, by actually accusing us of committing a genocide in Gaza,
it's worse,
of creating a deliberate famine in Gaza. Even if you go, for instance, I distribute the Kogat daily figures. Kogat is the official Israeli humanitarian aid organization. And they send out on a daily basis the amount of tonnage going in every day into Gaza, in what it's including as well, which defies the lies that the Western media are spreading about us. So again, if you're talking about the not just denazification of the Palestinians or the parts of the Palestinians or whatever, but actually you're talking about trying to drain the swamp of a poison that's infecting the mind of the West and is being adopted by the West. It's adopted on Western campuses and used against us. You don't see demonstrations going on Western campuses about the slaughter of Jews by Hamas, about the indoctrinated messages of Hamas and people like this. You hear it only totally against Israel. And it reflects again on the media, whether it's the BBC, Sky News, CNN, or whatever. They're looking to say, aha, moment against Israel and protecting Hamas behind a blanket of poor Palestinians. That's part of the swamp that I feel needs to be drained in epidemiological terms.
Okay, agreed. And we have to get to work on doing it. And I think we can't do this alone. We have to be the catalyst, the initiator of, if you will, an international campaign which begins to work on recovering our core values and propagating them in all age groups. Keep in mind, children and the young are the most vulnerable groups. What you do with the children has a shelf life of an impact forevermore afterwards. So we have if you will, draining the swamps begins in the schools, the nurseries even, and the communities. And of course, there's the whole role of social media, which is a whole new world unto itself. And God knows what's going to happen with the use of AI to promote some of the motifs. But can we go forward and do better? We have to. There's no alternative. Now, I say this. I once worked on an Israeli-Palestinian textbook commission. The conclusion I came to when looking at the textbooks, and there were big problems in the Palestinian textbooks, is tell me what's in the textbooks, and I'll tell you what it'll be in 10, 15 years if the population's reading those textbooks. And that's...
We covered that.
Yeah, that's the situation.
Let me personify this. Tomorrow, I've been invited onto a podcast in Australia. We have friends there as well. Let me just give you an example of what I'm talking about over here. On the 7th of October, the square outside the Sydney Opera House was crowded by thousands, mainly migrants from the Middle East. And as we were being slaughtered still, they were chanting, "Death to Jews, gas the Jews, Allah Akbar." And when the Australian Jewish community protested to the Australian government and to the mayor of Sydney, why she allowed this protest to go ahead with this sort of thing, her excuse was, Australia is a democracy, and we allow free speech. Free speech. Gas the Jews, fuck the Jews, death the Jews, Allah Akbar in Australia and lots of European countries is permitted under the guise of free speech. Now, what has happened a year later in Australia? Free speech, as Jews knew from history, it starts by cursing the Jews and it ends by different stages. In Nazi Germany, they cursed the Jews, and then it was followed by Kristallnacht, where they burnt the books and they burnt the synagogues. Guess what's happened in the last month in Australia? They have torched and burnt the synagogues in Melbourne and Sydney. Just a few days ago, they torched a Jewish day school. It was Heinrich Heine that says, where they burn books, where they burn synagogues, they eventually burn people. Australia, are you paying attention? The mayor of Sydney, are you paying attention? The Prime Minister Albanese and Foreign Minister Wong, are you paying attention? Because this is the direction your country, Australia, is taking because you have allowed free speech. I'm talking to you now, Professor Rick. What is happening here is not just an epidemiological problem that we have to find out how we can de-radicalize Hamas. We need to find the epidemiological answer of how we deal with the lost and Western civilization that have given up their own true values in the name of woke progressivism and have lost direction. And again, the Jews, like they were in Germany, this isn't Nazi Germany. This is a more liberal progressive society. But the Jews are again the first victim.
Well, let's go back to denazification and democratization in Japan. They were the role models for effective change.
Well, they have democracy. You're talking about Germany is a democracy. Britain is a democracy. Sweden is a democracy. Australia is a democracy. But this is the way they're practicing it.
Well, okay, then. Well, we now realize that wasn't enough just to promote democracy. We now realize the goalposts have changed. We have to toughen our message. It's not enough just to merely promote democracy. We have to get back to something far more basic in terms of
because
making
your theory comes with a sociological problem of recognizing where the poisons are, the wells and the water systems, or maybe what produces the cancer. Because if you've got to get at the source, before you can have a healthy society. And part of the fault of the source in Western civilization are the very governments that govern the country and the cities and the capitals.
What you're saying is that the governments are propagating the poison.
Yes, they've allowed it to spread.
Yes. Well, that's very, very, very dangerous. Very, very bad. Now, the question is this. There's a nice concept. Again, I'm using public health. I'm sorry for going back to public health. We have to redefine what's now going on as unacceptable. It has now been normalized, what is going on.
Right.
Now we have to denormalize what has become normalized. That means redefining everything that's going on now is totally unacceptable. And I'll give you a nice precedent from public health. Back in the 1850s or so, people accepted as normal the fact that the water, all the wells were poisoned. It was accepted. It was accepted that as a given that you would have waterborne disease, and that's the way things were. Then along came an epidemic of cholera in London, and a man named John Snow traced the source, a certain pump called the Broad Street pump. And the epidemic stopped. Then thereafter, after that, the government of England, and notably the City of London, then took actions to totally introduce sewage systems into London. What had been accepted for hundreds of years, or 100 years or so, it now became unacceptable. Now we have to define the current mass pandemic of indoctrination and incitement to anti-Semitic motifs as an unacceptable pandemic. That's it.
And how you do that, I guess the only way to do it is really to change the management team or whatever it is that have led to this pandemic to spread, led the poison to spread,
Change the
and encourage the poison by laissez-faire. I find an equivalent in, for instance, what happened in Los Angeles, where Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Los Angeles you refused to take what was common sense steps in order to prevent the outbreak of a raging fire that virtually burnt down vast parts of Los Angeles. How you do that? Either these people get back and start doing what they should have done years ago and to correct it, or you have to get rid of those managers or whatever and change them for a team that's going to lead to a better society.
That's what happened in Nazi Germany and in Japan.
Right. Or perhaps what's happened in America right now with maybe perhaps the introduction of Trump replacing the rotten people who are more involved in liberal, progressive, woke ideologies rather than deal with day-to-day problems that are affecting people. But this is a matter of life and death when it comes to Jews, not only here in Israel, but society general and Jews in particular in different countries.
Back to Gaza now, and to the Palestinian Authority and our region. We have to get to work on redefining indoctrination and incitement as totally unacceptable because of their toxic effects, not only on the young, but everyone, and the intergenerational effects. And the people who are paying the cost of this toxicity are not only the Jews, but the Palestinian society itself in Gaza and in the West Bank.
Yeah.
They're as much the victims as we are in certain ways.
And I've been one that's been pressing for years for Western governments, Western leaders, to not just promote and pander to and encourage and develop the leaders, the current leaders, unelected leaders, by the way, of the Palestinians, but to look behind on two things. First, of what these people are saying to their own people in Arabic, not what they're telling you in English, because that's where the truth lies.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about Hamas here, I'm talking about Fatah, the PLO, and Mahmoud Abbas. You listen not only what he's telling his own people in Arabic, but actually what he's doing, and not what he's telling the BBC or the Prime Minister of Britain or whatever, because the truth lies in what they're telling their own people. I quote, for instance, Yasser Arafat, who told the world at time of Oslo, he believes in peace of the brave. At least that's what we thought he said. In fact, what he was actually telling his own people in Arabic, he was going to give us peace of the grave. Just a mistake of one letter in English. And this played itself out by Yasser Arafat being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for agreeing to a peace treaty with Israel, which he never upheld for one day, because Yasser Arafat killed more Israelis after he was presented with the Nobel Peace Prize than he killed before. And that Nobel Peace Prize was never withdrawn from his hands. And the same deception, the Western deception, who are pushing this two-state solution as the only game in town, as a possible solution for the Palestinian problem.
What we're talking about is not only the perpetrators, be it the Palestinian Authority.
It's the enablers.
You took the words right out of my mouth. The enablers and the facilitators.
Right.
And the bystanders. And there's one thing we all know from the whole field of genocide and its prevention. It results from human choice and bystander indifference. And until we deal with not only the actions of the perpetrators, but the bystander indifference, we're still in deep, 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 deep trouble. And we may be facing a problem which is becoming ever more intergenerational. And this is very, very serious. At the same time, when I ever give this message to people I talk to, they say, "Why are you such a pessimist?" I say, "Well, I'm also an optimist." I say, "Look at the model of Germany and Japan, where you had top-down command and control, total institutional and structural change, and it worked more than people expected it to work." So, but we have to get serious about totally overhauling the curricula and social media and nursery textbooks and nursery rhymes and everything from A to Z in the Palestinian world to begin effective change. And we have to use rewards and punishments and coercive measures if need be. And we have to get rid of pay for slay, which enables all of the above. And means an awful lot of hard work. We have to get serious.
In which case, we shouldn't allow the current personnel operating the Palestinian Authority not only not to run their own communities from Ramallah, but to do the same in Gaza.
Of course. And this means the kind of takeover and change and restructuring which you've proposed, perhaps under the aegis of the Abraham Accord Protectorate, you called it?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a very good term. I like it. And we have to get serious about promoting these ideas. And by the way, we should not be wasting time. We should already be doing things tied to the aid going into Gaza. There's no reason why we can't link the start of dehumidification to the food supply. What goes into put sayings into the food packages from the Quran, which promote live love life and respect for life.
This is common sense, because the United Nations organization have been a total failure because they're operated in Gaza, whether they like to admit it or not, by Hamas. And quite frankly, the other alternative, until something like the Abraham Protectorate is accepted norm, that Israel then has to not only supply the food and the water and medical supplies as we are doing, but we should do the distribution, because to simply give it to Hamas, and Hamas has made a fortune. Folks, you don't know this, but for the last year or so, Hamas has made a fortune from the aid that we've supplied. You think it goes because of the United Nations sort of warehouse, that's the end of the game. It's who's operating these warehouses? Hamas. And they're distributing it on the market and on the black market and making a pile of money, millions of dollars. So the West are deceiving themselves. They're not deceiving us. They're deceiving their own communities and their own public by telling them the lies. So we come back to draining the swamp, but draining the swamp has to be, again, draining the swamp of the people who are perpetuating this thing of which we are the first in line to be killed and damaged by it.
Amen.
You agree with that?
Amen.
Okay, I think on that agreed note, you can appreciate, I hope, the problems and the perspectives from an Israeli point of view and from a Jewish point of view as well, outside of it. You have to have your leaders to become realistic to the truth of what's going on over here, but also realistic to the truth of what's going on there in your country as well, because you're being affected by it. And they should do it before more Jews are killed, not only over here in Israel, but in your country as well. So on that warning note, first of all, I want to thank Professor Ritter for being here and showing a light on the epidemiological danger of this. I hope to interview soon Gad Sai to talk about the psychological effect on this. And maybe then I'll have a conversation between Gad Sai and Professor Richter as well on this score.
Great idea. I'm all for it. Because one of the things that intrigues me is I've been talking about the exposure to the indoctrination, but I don't think I have much of an understanding of what the effects of this exposure are in terms of what's going on inside the brain and the psychology of all the populations being exposed to these messages of hate.
Well,
that's an interesting story.
From a scientific point of view, it's both physical, environmentally, and also psychological damage that's being caused, and it's not being dealt with, it's not being solved, and we need more professionals in these fields like yourself and Professor Gudsad and others to really address this and bring it to the public's attention.
I once tried to tackle this issue, and I have to admit it was beyond my competence, but I think we have to put some pretty smart people to work on addressing this issue, because I think by doing so, they'll help us generate better, more effective models for prediction and prevention. And the time is short and the clock is ticking. We shouldn't be waiting.
Right. So there you go. I've given you a lot of food for thought. Also giving you a number of books for you to get to.
Not only food for thought, but the food for thought should be linked to the food for
the heart and the soul and the mind.
And what's going into the food for the stomach. The food for thought has to be linked to the food for the stomach.
So thank you for joining us. This is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel.
Thank you for having me.
אנחנו מכריזים לזאת